Two worlds existed on the same planet, and neither knew the other was real. One believed the sea ended in monsters. The other believed the sea led to spices. On April 22, 1500, those two beliefs collided on a single stretch of sand, and only one side understood that a war had just begun, without a single shot being fired. The afternoon was quiet. Too quiet, some would later say. For over 40 days, the fleet had crawled across the Atlantic. Sails stretched thin, timber groaning beneath the endless weight of the water. The men aboard were tired, salt-crusted, and half-convinced the horizon would never break. Then it did. A shape rose from the edge of the world, tall, rounded, impossibly green. A voice cracked across the deck, "Land." And with that single word, everything changed. Though almost no one aboard realized how much. This was never supposed to happen. Pedro Álvares Cabral had not set out to find a continent. His orders were simple and enormous at once: reach India, secure the spice routes, and build on what Vasco da Gama had opened only years before. Wealth lay in the east in pepper, in silk, in the markets of distant kings. The mission was trade, not discovery. Yet the ocean had other plans. What appeared on the horizon was not marked on any chart carried by that expedition. It had no name, no borders drawn by European hands, no place in the mind of any man on those ships. They called the mountain Monte Pascual. As the fleet drew closer, the coastline unrolled before them like a secret being told for the first time. It was not a small island. It was vast, layered, and alive. Pero Vaz de Camina, the scribe tasked with recording the voyage, reached for his most careful words. Good air, abundant water, trees tall and strong. But beneath his measured phrases sat something he could barely name, a sense that this place was not merely large. It was deep. It carried weight. It carried promise. And promise, to men serving a crown, was never neutral. The ships slowed. Anchors bit into the seabed. Smaller boats were lowered, oars dipping into calm water. No words had yet been exchanged between the two worlds, and still, something passed between them. A charge in the air, because this land was not empty. It never had been. While European eyes studied the shore, other eyes studied the ships. From the tree line, from the sand, watchful and unblinking, people who had lived here for countless generations observed the strange floating shapes and the pale figures they carried. Neither side spoke. And in that silence, thick, electric, unrepeatable, the history of an entire continent quietly began to bend. There was no speech, no banner unfurled with ceremony. The first figures to step onto the open beach wore no armor, no metal, no fear. Their skin caught the sunlight warm and brown, their bodies marked with the deep red of urucum. Some held long bows loose in their hands. Others simply stood and watched. Then came the Portuguese, and the contrast could not have been sharper. Wrapped in wool, bound in leather, sweating inside heavy boots beneath a tropical sun, they looked almost absurd against the ease of the people before them. One side was dressed for a battle with the elements. The other was simply at home. Small objects appeared, mirrors lifted toward curious eyes, red beads, a bright scarlet cap, offered with a smile that hid careful calculation. To those giving them, they were trinkets. To those receiving them, they were strange and dazzling. But nothing in that moment was truly innocent. Behind every friendly gesture, the visitors were measuring not just the strength of the men before them, but the absence of things they expected to see. No walls, no fortresses, no iron blades, no signs of the warfare Europe knew so well, and in that absence they read a story that was not true. To them, no armor meant no power. Curiosity meant weakness. Openness meant surrender waiting to happen. There was no battle that day. There didn't need to be. There was only observation, and in the mind of an empire, observation was already the first move. The cross came next. It was driven into the sand not merely as an act of faith, but as a signature, a mark left by one world upon another. The makeshift altar faced the sea, as though the ocean itself were being called to witness what was now being claimed. Under an open sky, with the forest at their backs and painted figures watching from a careful distance, the Portuguese held their mass. Enrique de Coimbra led the words. The indigenous people watched, some mirroring the gestures, kneeling when the others knelt, a few laughing softly. They did not understand the language, but they understood that something serious was taking place. What they could not have known was that in the minds of the visitors, this ritual transformed the ground beneath their feet. The land was no longer just a place. It had become a possession. There was no treaty, no negotiation, no agreement between equals. A wooden cross in the sand was considered enough. In one quiet ceremony, a living landscape was converted into a political claim, and no one bothered to explain this to the people it belonged to. This is how empires often begin, not with a roar, but with a ritual. Not with conquest announced, but with meaning quietly rewritten while the true owners of the land look on, unaware that the terms of their world are being redrawn in a tongue they cannot speak. And still the assessment continued. European eyes swept across the coast the way a merchant scans goods laid out at market. The water was plentiful. The soil looked rich. The trees stood thick and resilient, the kind that grow fast when planted and pay well when cut. There was no glint of gold on the riverbanks, no jewels scattered in the sun, but one tree caught their attention above the rest, its wood carrying a deep reddish hue, strong and dense and highly prized across Europe. Slowly, a conclusion formed in their minds. This land held resources, and beyond the resources stood people without metal, without horses, without gunpowder. Here lies the great misreading of that entire encounter. The visitors saw absence and called it weakness. No iron, so they must be behind. No fortresses, so they must be defenseless. But there was no weakness on that shore. There was simply a different way of living, a society organized around knowledge the Portuguese could not recognize, balanced with a land they had never learned to dominate. The problem was never the people. The problem was the lens. Europe measured everything against itself, and anything unfamiliar was ranked as lesser. In that flawed comparison, a thriving world was quietly reduced to an opportunity waiting to be taken. The fleet lingered for about 10 days, just long enough to measure, to memorize, to imagine what this place could one day become. A handful of the land's inhabitants were taken aboard the ships not as guests, and not out of friendship, but for future use. They would learn the language. They would serve as bridges between worlds when the ships returned. Final gifts were handed out along the shore. More mirrors, more fabric, more small glittering things. The mood seemed peaceful, but peace and pause are not the same. What looked like calm was only the quiet before a much longer story. Then the sails rose again. The wind filled the canvas and pulled the vessels back toward the open Atlantic. The beach shrank behind them. But for the Portuguese, this land was not being abandoned. It was being remembered, filed away, marked for return. And for those left standing on the sand, watching the ships melt into the horizon exactly as they had first appeared, something had shifted that could never fully settle again. The sea swallowed the ships. It could not swallow the memory. Days later, the letter was completed, an organized, optimistic, deeply strategic account. It spoke of fertile ground, of clean air, of people with gentle natures. It painted a promising picture for the crown of Dom Manuel I. What it did not describe, at least not plainly, was the imbalance woven into every moment of that meeting. No line named it invasion. No line predicted the centuries of conflict to come. Yet all of it was already there in the cross, in the misread nudity, in the valued wood, in the bodies quietly taken. The ocean had hidden a continent, nothing more. And from that April onward, the Atlantic stopped being a border. It became a bridge, one that would carry history in directions no one on that beach could yet imagine.